I wonder what lens I should use for today's episode. Maybe 28 Summicron? Or 35 Summilux? Or maybe even 50 1.2 Noctilux?
Carlo, what about this?
Oh. What is this? Tri-Elmar. 28, 35, 50? This could work. Welcome back to Camera West TV. My name's Carlo, and on today's episode of Thumbprints and Signatures, we're featuring the original Leica Tri-Elmar. This lens features a 28, 35, and 50 millimeter focal lengths. So we're gonna see if this is the one camera and one lens combo. This lens features very common focal lengths that you would use for street photography. And the fact that you have 3 focal lengths in one lens on paper sounds really great, especially if you're only shooting at f11 or f16, then you kind of cover all your bases. But with having a maximum aperture of f4, you lose about maybe 2 or 3 stops of light, depending if you like opening up your lens to 1.4 or f2. The original Leica Tri-Elmar was created in 1998 to 2007 and was meant to be an all-in-one lens. And what this means is we had a 28, 35, and 50 millimeter focal length packed into one lens. This isn't necessarily a zoom because you can't use the lens in between focal lengths, much like a standard zoom. This lens is truly meant to be 3 lenses in one. So when you engage your different focal lengths, you'll feel hard stops and you'll see the corresponding frame lines match up in your viewfinder. This lens is perfect for photographers who constantly change their lenses or carry multiple lenses on a daily basis. Many photojournalists and travelers gravitated towards this lens because of its versatility, and I think that's what makes this lens really unique. It gives you plenty of options, so if you're in spaces where you wish you had a 50 or you wish you had a 28 or even a 35, it gives you the ability to choose that focal length at any given time. So we're about 20 or 30 minutes in, and already this lens seems like it's a lot to keep track of. Not only do you have to keep track of your aperture and your shutter speed as normal, but you also have to keep track of your focal length.
Does it engage the correct frame lines when you switch it?
Mm-hmm. Okay. There's times where I'm at 28 and I'm thinking I'm at 50. And I know that it does engage the correct frame lines, but sometimes when you're walking around and shooting from the hip, I'm thinking I'm shooting 50, but I'm actually at 28, or vice versa. At 28 millimeters, there's slight barrel distortion, and you can kind of see it around the edges, especially if you look at any straight lines in your image. They just kind of start to bow. And when you push into 35, the distortion slightly goes away, but it's still slightly prominent. When you go into 50, the lines are somewhat more straight, and I think that's mostly due to the compression of the 50 millimeter focal length. This lens has a very distinct visual signature, especially at f4. At 28 millimeters, you won't really notice the chroma ghosting effect. That's what we'll call it for now. It's not so prominent, and you can kind of get away with some of the images, and it kind of gives you this certain glow in your highlights. But when you move into 35, it's not as prominent, but it's still to the same effect at 28 millimeters. At 50 millimeters, you'll notice that the effect is pretty heavy, and it makes your images look slightly blurry, out of focus, and overall makes you feel like you just suck at manual focusing. When you start to stop down the lens, it really sharpens up, and you'll notice that the look is very similar to modern Leica lenses. And even though it is an aspherical lens, the aspheric lens elements don't really help the sharpness at f4 for most of the focal lengths. On paper, it seemed like it would be a great idea, but I guess there's just too many moving parts in this lens where you can't get everything as correct, which could be a reason why the second version of the Tri-Elmar ended up being a wide angle lens from 16, 18 to 21. So my experience in using this lens, I found myself gravitating towards the 28 and 50 focal lengths the most. I didn't necessarily use the 35 mostly because I didn't feel like I needed that range. And I felt like anytime I saw a composition I wanted to do, it was either going to be wide or kind of close. And I know that those two focal lengths tend to complement each other, and 35 was kind of the oddball on this lens. The ability to use 35 was great, but I don't think, in the way that it's positioned, you have 28 and 50 right next to each other, and then you have to turn the lens all the way to 35 at the end. And to be honest, I really forgot about the 35mm focal length, and that's not really on purpose. It's just the way that this lens is built. You have 28 and 50 right next to each other, so you go from fairly wide to a normal range really quickly. And I think going from 28 to 35 or 35 to 50, you don't have that much variation in terms of your focal length. So you could either step back or step forward with 35, which would kind of defeat the purpose of having this lens. But then again, when you are only using 2 of the focal lengths on this lens instead of the intended 3, then you might as well just stick to the prime lens in general. I will say that the image quality I got at f4 wasn't my favorite. I'm sure there is a specific look or use that this lens can give to any photographer that's looking for that type of effect. Maybe it looks different on film, but the way that it renders on a digital sensor is just not that pleasant. I will say that if you are going to use this lens, you would have fun knowing that you don't have to switch lenses and you can carry one lens. I would recommend this lens to any photographer that is looking to keep their setup very light and very versatile. And I think it's a little bit more cost effective as opposed to paying for 3 Summicrons or 3 Summilexes. You have the ability to use the focal lengths, especially if you're doing street photography or like any type of landscape. Most of the time you're going to be stopping this lens down, so you won't even have to worry about that ghosting coma effect. I feel like this is a great lens for most photographers to learn what focal lengths they tend to gravitate to. Like I realized how much I was using the 28 and 50 and how much I neglected the 35. And I think that has to do with what style of photography you're inspired by at the moment. And who knows, maybe this can inspire a new style of photography for you that you never would have wanted to justify buying just a 28 or just a 35 or just a 50. Even though the image quality from this lens isn't the greatest, I will say that the shooting experience is actually one of the most unique and fun experiences I've had with a Leica lens. I think the fact that you do have 3 lenses in one is a great opportunity for photographers just to branch out and do something creative with their work. It's like they say, the best camera is the one that you have on you, and if you have 3 lenses on one, even better. This is Carlo from Camera West TV. I'll see you next time.
Hey Carlo,
Oh,
what about this lens?
what do we got? This could work.
Do it.
Cool.